Yeah. There we go. Got my laundry hanging.
Okay. So welcome to the second recorded ALF Jam topic call, which doesn't have a really good name.
ALF Jam topic call is good.
Can we do introductions first?
Yes.
If you have better ideas.
No, I'll start. I'm Mel Campo. I am a facilitator at ALCNIC with Abby and Ryan. I am also a librarian, and I am a facilitator.
Hey everybody, I'm Ryan Schollenberger. I'm also a facilitator at ALCNIC. I tend to do a lot of active stuff with the kids and also coordinate admissions.
And volunteers. And
yes.
Visitors. And cool. And I'm going to participate more in this call than I did in the previous one because it's just the three of us jamming. So I pulled the topic from the hashtag startup support channel in Slack, and it was Carissa from Thought Quotient was asking a bunch of things, but in a question about how to handle kids celebrating different holidays and a question about like neurodiversity among her students and like how to support them, I heard this like bigger question of like how do you facilitate to support like a diverse group of kids, which is something we do. And well, I'm not going to say that we do more than other schools, but we've been doing for longer than other schools being in East Harlem. So it seems like a good one for us to kind of jam on.
Yeah, and certainly we're in a, really diverse city and have like, I think a higher potential to have a really diverse community than certain other places. So we get more practice at it.
Yeah, that is true. Although we do also have our blind spots. I mean, we are 3 white people on this call right now. It's 3 cis white people. So that's real and something that I think should be acknowledged here at the outset. And obviously something that we're actively working on are to have our facilitator population more reflective of our student population, which is not all white. But yeah, I mean, part of that comes from like in the startup phase, the like economic privilege that we have experienced allows us to like take more risks and like get in this position. So.
Yeah. Well, it's been interesting, because we can talk about like the lots of different kinds of diversity, like how do a bunch of cis people like support a community where not everyone is identifying that way, or like back in the days where we were like almost all male-bodied beings and male-identifying beings. Like we had a lot of conversations about women in the space, both on staff and as parents and as students, and what actively we could do to like make sure we were welcoming and like comfortable.
Right. But
something that's been interesting in the past like 2 years as we've had more international families has been the conversations about listening to how the conversations about racial diversity and like religious diversity change when we throw in like this family from Eastern Europe or from Latin America or from Russia, and the like really interesting like complex layers that they bring.
Yeah.
Yeah, because on the one hand you have a community of families who, not only is open-minded enough to, enroll their kids in an ALC, but like who is trusting them to be part of a community that's really like open and is not necessarily reflective of those places they're coming from. And, you know, I mean, it's interesting because especially with the like international families, Abby, you find these like cultural patterns that are there, and like some of them I wasn't even aware of before, and like I've learned about through the kids who have enrolled at ALC, you know, and not even things that they necessarily like, I don't know, believe in or like, you know,
are conscious of.
Yeah, exactly. But they're like kind of running in the background, or they're things that they've like been exposed to, and thus like, you know, influence their worldview and how they're showing up.
Yeah.
Yeah. Are there things that you've done to like be able to better support kids who show up and and are different from, or like living different experiences from what you've lived?
Yeah. Well, and one of the things that was brought up, I mean, the question stems from a question about celebrating religious holidays. And we have a pretty significant observant Jewish population in our school. And regularly, like, I know so much more about what kosher eating looks like now than I did when I started, because we do cooking every week. And so to try and figure out a meal that is like kosher, but also takes into account the vegans and takes into account these kids who don't, you know, like various different food things, but kosher specifically, is a really interesting one. Like you can't prepare hot and cold. There's like a hot and cold thing. It's all escaping me now. And that being said, like me being aware that kosher dietary needs exist and knowing the general guidelines of how to run a cooking class that is, for the most part, kosher friendly is different from the experience of eating kosher. And like I can have respect for that and hold space for that to make sense, but also not be an authority on the topic, which is, I think, has been an interesting distinction for me to make. What is the difference between like knowing and respecting and leaving space for someone's cultural practices and presuming that it is my place to explain them?
Yeah.
And on the flip side, like, should it be my place to explain them? Like, whose place is it?
Sorry, go ahead.
It's okay. Because I also think a lot, I mean, I know I said we were all cis people, but I am a queer woman, and I think a lot about like whose job it should be to explain queerness and gender. And I go out of my way a lot to make sure that it is not the kid's responsibility to do that, that it is mine as like an adult queer person, but also to like put it back on, you know, my fellow ALFs or the students who I see like thinking about it, and to like challenge them to hold my boundary about like what it is okay to say or not say about queer people in our space, because we're a community that I'm a member of. So there's both sides of that, I think. Ryan, you're on mute.
I knew I was going to do that at some point. And I was going to say, I'm like over twinkling you, because I think responsibility versus opportunity is like key here. It's like you can leave space for a kid to explain what it means to be kosher, and you know what the significance of it is from, you know, from a Jewish religious standpoint. But it's like it's not necessarily their responsibility. Like they don't have to know every fact or like explain every fact to every other kid. I mean, you know, it's the kind of thing that like as facilitators we're responsible to be aware of and to like leave space for those things to be you know, happening in our community. But it's like if kids are excited to explain that stuff, then absolutely, like I want them to have the space to do that and to feel like comfortable doing that, you know?
Right. Yeah, I agree. So it's like striking a balance between leaving space for the kids to speak their own experiences, but also making sure that they don't feel obligated to explain those things every time it comes up.
Exactly. Yeah, and with like things that I didn't know about before and that I learned from them, then I feel better informed to then have that be not necessarily my responsibility, but if no one else wants to, then my responsibility to explain to other kids who are maybe like new to the space and don't understand. Because it can get annoying to explain something like 10 different times as new people come and go.
Absolutely.
It's like, when you break your arm and everyone's like, what happened? And you end up like explaining it 100 times. And it's like, I should just wear a sign that says how I broke my arm,
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, I think we're fortunate in that a bunch of our kids are enthusiastic and proud about and informed, and they want to talk through their identities and their belief systems.
Yeah.
And because of the culture we've built here, where we are able to have respectful conversations where we're I love you, so I'm trying to understand you.
Right.
And even if we have different conclusions, at the root of it, we can feel that we're in this dialogue because it's we care about each other, and everyone feels, some of them are still practicing, but we're actively trying to build a culture where people feel free to say actually I need a break from this conversation, or actually I need you to go ask somebody else now.
Right.
So
which is totally legit, because the four of us share a lot in common philosophically, but we also have different opinions about things and are diverse in our beliefs, and maybe not so much backgrounds geographically or socioeconomically, but I mean we're not always in alignment on everything, and that's, I think, a really good model for kids to see.
Yeah. It's something I think a lot of with the... Sorry, go ahead, Mel.
No, I was just agreeing. Sorry. Go ahead.
Do you know that there's a ring diagram that's online, and it's a guide for talking to people and navigating situations where someone's mourning, where there's the tragedy?
Oh.
The people in...
Will you describe it a bit? I think I know what you're talking about, but I want to make sure it's the same thing.
Yeah, it looks like a bullseye. It's a bunch of rings, and in the innermost ring are the people the people directly impacted.
Mm-hmm.
It's not stages of grief, Rye. I see your chat comment. It's the I can look it up and post a link with the video after. I looked it up when my friend's brother, when I was going to my friend's brother's funeral and trying to figure out how do I engage with this person who I feel for and don't know how to
right.
Which that was a whole interesting thing, because we got there and we're walking in and her family's Filipino, and it's a bunch of us white Pennsylvania folks, and one of her close friends pulled us aside and was so all of her aunties are going to come up to you and say smile, we're taking pictures now, it's a cultural thing, just go with it. Which was super helpful of this person to prep us all to be supportive in this way we otherwise wouldn't have known
right
acting without my friend having to do it.
Right.
But the concentric ring thing is, it's the farther removed you are from the situation, the farther out your ring is, and you're supposed to communicate only comfort and support in, and then your own processing and dumping and whatnot in outer rings to people in your ring.
So at the center would be the person to whom this is happening, and the ring around that would be their closest people who are also affected, and then a ring out 1 degree more removed, like that.
Yeah. And so thinking of the fatigue that comes with the emotional labor of having to constantly explain the body that you're in, or your
right.
It's oh, right. So I'm going to look for, I'm going to stay in my lane. I'm going to look for the writings and videos and listen to people of this identity who are talking to inform myself, rather than further burden the people who are in those inner rings. And then that sets me up to support them by kind of staving off these other people in my rings and the outer ones. So I haven't quite, it's a diagram that I think about a lot in these conversations, even though it was made for a different situation.
Yeah.
So
it reminds me of the please ask before you touch someone's hair conversation that we had earlier today. I don't know if a video gets published with this, but I have bright fuchsia hair, and it is shaved on the sides, and it is very short on top, and kids like to touch it, which like is kind of the point of having hair like this, right? It makes me a beacon of like easy to interact with facilitator. But also it allows me to say, hey, 9-year-old, you have to ask before you can touch my hair. Every time. You always have to ask. And you have to ask everyone else anytime you want to touch their hair too. And like it allows me to do that in a way that like my hair is like a little beacon, and so they want to do it, and I get to have this conversation all the time. But I also get to know that when that white girl goes out into the world, she's not going to go around asking like presuming that she can touch people's hair without asking, which I think is important. I don't know. I think it's like a small thing that I can do as a white person to support other white people in recognizing that like can't just go around touching people's hair without asking.
Yeah, certainly.
I think there's a lot we can say on racial and gender identity.
You said part of the question was about neurodiversity too, right, Abby?
Yeah, that's people can always ask us for more detail on something if there's something more they're curious about. But
I mean, I don't want to shift if we're not ready to, but I feel like neurodiversity is a really good topic for ALCs in general, because a lot of families who are going to be interested in ALCs are going to be ones whose kids are either have already had trouble or not been sort of successful in the traditional mold, or who they like foresee having those struggles. And, I think one of the things that I've always loved about, self-directed learning environments in general, but especially ALCs, is that a lot of those things that show up as problems in traditional environments are not even really, like, they don't show up as problematic at all for us.
Yeah.
And that doesn't mean that like every, neurodiversity like is not a thing that we even have to think about, but like things, that are so commonly diagnosed, like ADHD and, just general like attention disorders are not like showing up as problematic for us.
Yeah, I'm definitely interested in talking about that. Neurodiversity is something I think about a lot also, and really appreciate about what we do, particularly having grown up around a lot of people who were diagnosed with ADHD who were musicians or dancers. One of the things that got me sent down this path to self-directed education is that Ken Robinson talk, where he talks about Jillian, I forget her last name. She is the choreographer of Cats. And they brought her, as she was a kid, she was brought to a psychiatrist who was told that, she's a terrible student. She can't sit still in school. She never pays attention in class. And he walked out of the room and turned on a radio and told her mother to just watch through the glass of the office. And she got up and started dancing. And he said, she isn't, there's nothing wrong with her. She's a dancer. Like, take her to a dance class. She'll be fine. And they did. And she later said of it that for the first time in her life, she was surrounded by people like her, people who needed to move to think. And then went on to become like a, very famous choreographer. She choreographed Cats. She choreographed Phantom of the Opera, I want to say. She worked up with Andrew Lloyd Webber. She made millions of dollars. She was highly successful in any measure that you might have of success. And it was all because someone was like, oh, she's fine the way that she is. Just let her move around a little bit. And I think about that story a lot, and I see it in some of the kids that we have in school as I watch them, like, a kid who sits in the makerspace all day painting miniature figures for weeks at a time, but who, when faced with a task that she has to complete, will refuse and drag her feet and insist that she couldn't possibly do it, but a kid who like ostensibly should not have the fine motor skills that she has to sit there and do a task for hours and days and weeks that is like part of a larger project that she sees the value of. A kid who in a, you know, probably in a normal school would be discouraged from doing exactly that same thing. I don't know. I think of that story a lot. Which was a long ramble to say I agree with you, ADHD, about ADHD, Ryan.
Yeah, well, and Mel, you saying, you know, the point about there's nothing wrong with this kid, just let them, and then fill in the blank here. I think that's like one of the really like wonderful things about the amount of freedom and space we can give kids to show up and just actually be who they are. And, you know, if they can't sit in a class for 2 hours, they don't have to. And that doesn't mean they're not learning, and it doesn't mean they're not growing and maturing. It just means they're not doing it in the way that most people associate with normal or like traditional, you know?
Right.
You know, and like, not only does our philosophy support that, our tools support that too. I mean, you know, like the game shifting board is a really great example. The only setting for bodies is not calm and focused, like there is a raucous or there is a relaxed, you know? And I mean, that's, you know, that's a really simple iteration of it. You could have way more specific stuff. Like I know actually, Mel, I was looking at the game shifting board in your spawn the other day and noticing how you got really specific with some of the things there, right? Like your perch seat and whether there is music allowed or, you know. So I think, you know, it's like with most things in ALC, you begin with the sort of root philosophy and then you grow outwards from there. So like not only do our philosophy support neurodiversity and our like facilitation styles, but the actual tools we're using do that as well.
Yeah. I love the game shifting board as a tool for supporting neurodiversity. Like from the background of like, I was an anxious kid who it would have been helpful to me to have a stack or know exactly how we're talking or to know what the rules of this thing are. But also, since you mentioned the one in my spawn and I made that with the kids, all of the things on that game shifting board are things that we were asking about every day in spawn. So the buy-in that they have to use these tools to better support their own brain and the flexibility of the tools themselves to look different depending on who is using them and what they need, I think is one of the best things that we do.
Yeah. Right, I see your message in the chat. Can you explain what stack and game shifting are? I think my plan is to share this video just within the facilitating community.
Okay, that's what I was.
But you never know.
Yeah, sure. And I mean, not every ALC is using every tool that every other one is. So I didn't know how much context people would have. First of all, stack is one specific thing that is often on the game shifting board that essentially denotes like this person is next up in who's going to talk or share or participate in whatever way. And that's actually one of the talking styles, which is a part of the game shifting board. The game shifting board in summary is basically making implicit patterns and implicit ways of structuring meetings and gatherings explicit. Well, did Abby just turn into Thomas? Yeah, it's about making the implicit explicit. The way we're talking, the start and end time of meetings, who is facilitating the meeting, who is actually working the tool of the game shifting board. Yeah, so it's definitely a useful tool for visual people because you can actually see, okay, this is like how everything is going to be laid out, and like this is how long we've been in the meeting and how much longer we've got to go. And it's also really good if you like to be the person who is like paying attention to how everyone is sort of like showing up and what their energy is, and you can use the tool to reflect that and to kind of play with that to benefit the group.
Yeah.
Well, for Mel, to your point, like about how that tool can be really helpful for like anxiety reduction, I find being in a an environment like that is this non-competitive produces anxiety for a lot of kids, which leaves them more space to like work through whatever is going on and focus on whatever else is going on for them. It's just like, and it's really fun to see when that happens during the deschooling process, where a kid comes in and like they've got all their armor on still.
Right.
So I think that's like, we've got the tools and the culture here that supports a bunch of different students, like in releasing like that part.
Yeah.
Realize somewhat. The other, I don't know, it's so funny. I remember walking in to, it wasn't this school, it was the Brooklyn Free School. I had, like, when I was a college student, and I'd been looking at just like how different people learn, and been looking at like this like special education focused school and like these gifted and talented programs and programs for like at-risk kids who are dealing with trauma or like loss of cultural identity, or were at risk for joining gangs, or like, you know, all of the different variations. Like hung out with an occupational therapist for a bit, talked to some like child therapists and counselors, and they would come up with these brilliant accommodations to like support the kids in getting whatever they needed to feel like safe enough and comfortable enough to be able to then like focus on learning things, or to be feeling seen and heard enough to like heal them, like be healed, or like begin that healing process and work on that. And I was like, this, like, I see learning environments where this stuff is incorporated for like specific populations, but it was not completely, but frequently the same kinds of things over and over again. So it was very exciting then to walk into, like in my first experiences with like student directed education, to be like, oh my gosh, yeah, like give this to all the kids. This is the thing that makes the most sense. And so it's been fun to be like, yeah, we just have balance boards and fidget spinners and like weighted blankets, and like people bring their comfort animals in, their emotional support animals, their like whatever. And there's not just is there like absence of stigma, but there's like excitement and embracing of like, this is part of who you are. You're going to pace on the couch while you think, like, you know?
Yeah.
Which leaves space for them to all shine in their different ways.
That sums it up pretty beautifully, actually.
Yeah. Well, and I love that we, the point I think you alluded to, but give them as many tools as they want. Like if they're like, none of these are working for me, you know, I would come up with something else. And that I would be excited about that part of my job as a facilitator, to say like, the idea that if a tool isn't working, you can just change it is so freeing, in a way that, like, as a person who my lists were making me anxious at one point, like I started using to-do lists as an anxiety reduction tool. And then I got to a point where my lists were making me really anxious and I didn't know what else to do. This was before I got to Agile. And then I came to Agile and got introduced to a Kanban, and that has changed my life since then. But it had never occurred to me up until that point that I could change up my tool. I was like, this is a tool that worked and now it doesn't work, and what is wrong with me? I am broken. And I wonder if that is, I mean, I assume that that's not an experience that I am alone in having. I'm sure that there are lots of kids out there who have lots of different tools that have stopped work, or, you know, you change, you grow, you need something more complex.
Yeah, especially when you're given a tool and told this is the tool that you use for this thing, and it's the one tool that you can use to do this thing you're trying to do. Which,
right.
You know, may work for most people, but you use different. Exactly, Lolly. Yeah, you can use different tools for the same job. Right.
Yes. Even you, Lolly.
Her human is spraying outside.
Ah, I see. Well, in that case, I'm going to talk a little bit more about some of the options that are on the game shifting board in my spawn, because one of my favorite ones is the music option that you mentioned, Ryan. And I love that like as we were coming up with the things that would go on the board, of course we wanted talking and how we would talk and what we would talk about. And there's a seat that's on top of a shelf that is very appealing and people fight over. So the perch is an option on the game shifting board also. But the inclusion of music has been really interesting because there is an option to play a song in the background or to play on the keyboard that is in the library. Which often results in people singing their intentions or dancing their intentions. And Abby, I think you had some dancing intentions recently too. And I don't know, I think it's exciting that to be in a space where kids' learning and intellect is not separate from their body. I think that's like a really important part of deschooling, and a really powerful thing that we do is we say like, you are a whole person and your body is a part of that. So if you need to dance out your intentions this morning, then by all means, let us put on the keyboard and we can all dance out our intentions.
Yeah, and like prioritizing what your body needs. Like if you come in one day and you're tired and you need to take a nap, that's okay. Like,
right.
The message is not you've only had a successful day in school if you've spent 6 hours in classes or doing worksheets or whatever. You can, take time for personal care and that be just as important, usually more important than like, what content you're learning in a day.
Yeah. I mean, learning how to take care of your person is a really hard thing. And something that we expect people to suddenly know when they turn 18 and they're suddenly responsible for feeding and taking care of. And I know it's something that you talk about a lot, Rai, because you are really conscious, like, and live in your body. And like you talk about your eating and how that makes you feel, or like how much water you've drank, or if you've moved your body today. And like, I think that's a really powerful thing too.
Yeah. And like, okay, so to like, that's actually perfectly on topic because, one type of diversity is like where kids are coming from a cultural and, familial standpoint in regards to food and body image and, what it means to be healthy or what eating healthy means or just like a healthy lifestyle overall. So I think, I don't know, I really love that we talk about that so often at school, that that's a topic, and not one that's like, this is the right way to do it and this is the wrong way to do it. But, we always talk about this is how we do it. And like, this is how it makes me feel when I eat this way, or like when I eat gluten, I feel this way. So,
right. And that we give lots of different models on how to be a person, right, and say like, these are all valid.
Yeah. Even outside of the 4 models of people that are us.
Yeah.
Because like, we have a lot of other adults that come into the space too that are really different than us.
I, as the administrator, also feel a need to put an asterisk on the like behavioral differences conversation, because we can accommodate lots of different learning styles and expression styles and ways of like processing and emotions and all kinds of stuff. They're like, pragmatically, since this is for facilitators and some of you are running schools, like there will be times where you have to say to a family, like, we can't support your kid.
Yeah.
Like, whether it's because the elevator in our building has steps on both ends of it and it's like,
yep.
Or it's because like this kid has like violent outbursts to an extent where like we can't like guarantee the safety of other kids around them.
Yeah.
Like to the extent we feel we need to, like at some point you will need to have that conversation with the family, and it will always be hard. But if you are expecting to have it, it will be less hard than if it catches you by surprise.
Yeah. And oh, sorry, go ahead, Mel.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, it's hard, but it's, when it comes down to it, right, it's like, if it's going to affect your entire community to the point where, especially in the early going, in your first year or two, where it means like your community might dissolve and fall apart, then it's a really tough decision that you're going to have to make. And, I mean, it's the sort of like disadvantage we have in that, we're giving kids space and freedom to do things, and we're not like having our eyes on them every minute of the day in a literal sense. Like, we have to be able to trust that we can turn our backs for a minute and go help a kid with something else and know that they're not going to like have a violent physical outburst that we're not going to be able to control. I mean, when you have classrooms set up in a way that, you're at the front and you can see everything that goes on in them for every minute that kids are there, keeping control, so to speak, is easier. But, that's not what we're striving to do. We're striving to give kids freedom and give them responsibility. And
right.
It won't happen for every kid all the time.
And I mean, there's a lot that we've done and been able to do for different kids in terms of like changing access to certain tools or being mindful about what is where, or like learning about different de-escalation kind of tactics, and collaborating with parents and counselors. And there's a lot we can do, and we can help a lot of kids.
Right.
Part of that too is staying, like, what's really important with that is like that we're in communication. And so we're like, know we're available to help each other and know each other's like strengths and rapports with different kids enough to like tap out when we need to or call for support.
Exactly.
Yeah. And to know that it's not like a reflection on our success or failure as a facilitator, but is a reflection of what the kid needs at that moment.
Yeah, definitely.
Yep.
Trust your partners.
Yes.
Switching topics, speaking of partners, Chuck isn't here,
mm-hmm.
but when he walked out, I went to I was like, this is the topic of the call tonight. And he gave a quick answer to the holiday question.
Okay.
Like, record you and just write an FAQ. But he was like, oh, the way we handle kids celebrating different holidays in our space is we celebrate the ones that want us to the way they want us to, and don't the ones that don't. And we don't mark kids absent if they're off site for religious holidays.
Yeah.
We expect parents to let us know if there's a religious holiday and that's why they're off site. So we to do that. But it's pretty much like similarly to how we tend to use I statements when talking about our experiences and our choices. We ask them, like, do you celebrate your birthday? Do you want it on the calendar for everyone to see? Like, are you going to be in school for Black Friday or for Hanukkah or for Sukkot? Whatever conversation moment is. And we let them tell us what they want their expression to be.
Yeah. We also tend to stay open for as many holidays as possible. I mean, we will be closed Thursday and Friday of this week because some of us are going home to our families. And we have a winter break that coincides with Christmas and New Year's. But we are open on Martin Luther King Day and Veterans Day. And we are there to talk about those holidays and the sticky things that they entail sometimes. Looking at you, Columbus Day, which is on our calendar as Indigenous Peoples Day, and we are open for it so that we can have that conversation with kids because we think that that's important. So, I mean, there's definitely a balance between this Thanksgiving break. I think we are all ready to take some space from each other because we have been in school for 12 straight weeks, and that's valid and an important part of creating your schedule. But if for the most part you can stay open and talk about holidays, then you get to know more about them.
And part of the reason we're open is that we tried the first few years to be in conversation with the parents and the kids about which holidays were important to them and set our schedule based on that, which was wouldn't be possible now with the number of kids we have. But at the time we had 8, so it was doable. But like, there was a day we came in and there was one kid.
Yeah,
We were like, you said.
I think that was Martin Luther King Day, actually, because I remember it being kind of cold.
Yeah.
Wait, what were you saying? Do I remember what I said?
No, I was trying to remember what the day. It doesn't matter. Um, but yeah, the families have been like, this is a day we don't feel like we need off school. We'd rather have school be open so you can like talk to our kids about it. And then none of them showed up because it was a DOE, a Department of Education, like public school holiday.
Right.
And our kids wanted to play with their friends.
Yeah, it made total sense.
So like at this point, we mostly align with the Department of Ed calendar.
Yep.
Like in our conversation about which holidays are important to you or not, we missed the like, oh, and how much do you care about seeing your friends, or how much do you need a break from each other at this moment? So
right.
This iteration of our calendar is based in those kind of lessons that we've learned.
I'm also remembering, Abby, the specific question that sparked this topic. Part of it was like, what do you do when, some kids celebrate a holiday and others don't, or maybe some celebrate birthdays. I think it was like specifically about birthdays, right? And like, I mean, I feel like in that case, if you have two students or you have a student who doesn't like celebrate birthdays, like that's not a thing their family does, I think like that's maybe one of the harder examples, right? Because most people celebrate birthdays. I don't know, like, do you feel like, and I'm asking you too, like, do you guys feel like that it is partially on that student's parents to say, hey, like, this is the thing most people do, we don't, here's why, right? And then for us as facilitators to say, like, yeah, sure, like, you were born on a day, it's a cultural tradition that a lot of people celebrate, but like, it's no big deal if you don't, like, if you...
Well, I think it's different for us to have that conversation than like ALC Mosaic has an around the sun ritual that they do for kids' birthdays. And I think it would be a harder conversation if we had like Jehovah's Witness kids that like than it is for them, because like they default to celebrating every kid's birthday and so have to talk about exceptions. Whereas we've set things up so that we default to like, do you want, like, is this a thing for you? Do you want to do a thing about it? Okay, cool.
Yeah, because we don't really make a big deal of birthdays. Like, and when I say we, I mean us as facilitators. We don't like plan parties for the kids or like you plan events and like usually just leave space for them and their families to do that if they want.
Yeah. And we've got kids who come in and like put a box of donuts on the table and walk away and don't care. We've got kids who like school is the place where their otherwise separated parents come together to throw them a big party.
Right.
You know,
but I think I think the point about, I forget who just made it, but that we default to, we're neutral. What do you want to do? Is sort of the stance that we take on a lot of these things, is like, well, we don't have our own rituals. Although I guess if that like came from the students who were all really excited, then it would be different. Like it would still be neutral in that it wouldn't be like the three of us being like, we will have a ritual now. But like that it would be something that they would be excited about, and then I guess would be complicated by a new family coming in saying like, we don't condone this ritual at all.
Yeah, and on some level and at some point, right, you have to say, all right, well, this is our community, this is what we do. Like Mosaic, they do that ritual, you know? And I mean,
right.
if it becomes a big enough issue in the community to shift that ritual, then fine. If it's one family who's like really offended by it or who's really like, I don't know if I can do this, then like, I don't know, maybe that's like, it's not the right community for them, you know? I mean, it's not as, I'd say like, not as a drastic issue as if you like can't support a kid who's got like behavioral issues, but
right.
You know, on some level, like a community is a community, and there are norms and there are rituals and values that exist, you know, and they can shift, but you know, only so much, I would say, for like one person or one family.
That's tricky because I wouldn't, you know, our meetings are things that are mandatory rituals like our gratitude circle that we do at the end of every day is not mandatory.
Oh, sure.
Right. And then we release that, right?
Yeah.
So they can opt in or out as they please. You know, I would be hesitant to draw a hard line with a family around like a ritual that we set up as a community. More so than I would be if it was like, actually they were going to insist that we all like don't do this practice anymore, and we're not.
No, that's what I meant.
Collaborate with us on.
Yeah, no, that's what I meant. I wasn't insisting that, or I wasn't saying we would like insist that they participate in any rituals. I was just saying if it were like, you know, if it were like offensive enough that like some people are doing this but you don't have to, you know, that's all.
Yeah, I mean, my experience with my friends who, Jehovah's Witness is the like example that comes to mind because my friends who haven't done birthdays, that's been their background and their reasoning. And it's like, not that they were offended that I was celebrating a birthday. They just like weren't going to do it for themselves. So I could see a facilitator from outside that situation being like, can I do this without like making this kid feel bad? And it's, or like, can we as a community have this as like a regular ritual we do? If this is a person we love who's part of our community. Mm-hmm. And like, for me, that's one of the opportunities of being in an ALC is like, rather than worry about what the kid's going to feel or like how it's going to impact their relationship to the community and like try to assume and project, I can just ask, and we can like go to change up and be like, hey, we have this awareness. Like, do we want to do anything about it?
Yeah.
So.
Well, and I think to the point about at what point does a family being uncomfortable about that mean that they're not welcome in an ALC is, I think, the same point I would make about like, I don't know, I've been trying to form this analogy in my head, but like, I'm gay and people can have an issue with it, but they can't have an issue with it with me and still want to be a member of the ALC. And like, that's at the heart of all of this, is that like people can have their own opinions and bring them to ALC, and we encourage them to do that unless it harms another member of the community, in which case they can't.
Yeah, it's like we're in relationship. By being here, we're opting into relationship with each other, and that means like committing to care for and work with, like, for the growth of each of us, all of us, different as we are.
Right.
So any belief that like precludes that option for somebody, like they can't play.
Yeah.
Which is not a conversation we've had to have very often.
No.
Almost never.
Happens, but.
Yeah. But not very often. I mean, rarely enough that, you know, I throw this example out kind of flippantly because it's a thing that's never happened to me. And also that I am like extremely privileged to be at a, you know, to be in a community where me being out is not an issue for anyone. You know, that's extremely, I found a survey the other day that like something like 75% of all queer people are not out at work. And like, it's something, I mean, it's something I talk about all the time with kids of all ages. A 9-year-old wrote, gay cat is okay on the library door with a picture of me as a cat giving a thumbs up today. And like, that's awesome. And that's why I'm so excited to have these conversations. I want everyone to get a chance to feel that sense of love and inclusivity that comes from being a part of this community.
Yeah. We're like complex, multifaceted, strange universes. We gotta shine the light at all the parts of ourselves.
Exactly.
And like you being like, this is me is like, or the moments where you're like, this is me, and it's hard. Like, gives them grips and representation and modeling and perspective that like lets them step into themselves and explore themselves more authentically and powerfully. It's like,
no, I think the one, really the one sentence meme for this call should be "Gay cat is okay."
Gay cat is okay.
Oh, I love that.
I'm gonna put a photo on the Instagram.
Well, and that's a kid who like has a dyslexic label.
Yeah.
One of our kids who would get like a fine motor skills, like developmental delay, like dyslexic, who like in school would have all of these weights, like weighted labels on her. It's like,
Yeah. Who has been sitting making the miniatures all week.
yeah.
She made a video with them for her blog on Friday.
In like a super focused way that like a lot of adults wouldn't be able to do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
With like all of this stuff going on around her and all the other options, choosing to do that, having the focus, having the resolve to do that.
Yeah.
Yeah. By herself, like in the makerspace alone for hours at a time. Yeah. Just like painting miniatures, listening to music, working out the stories in her head.
I went in at one point today and like did a just like still life chalk pastel thing, like to have an excuse to just like hang out and be nearby. And she started like narrating her process to me. Super cool. Yeah, but we could do this. We could swoon about a bunch of the kids and their
yeah,
like other kids' diagnoses this morning being like, there's a person and I care about them. They are upset. I can tell. I want to help. How do I figure out how to help?
Yeah.
Can I ask them? Are they too upset to answer? Like, they did such a good job this morning.
Yeah, they did. Well, and it's interesting to see them all as a person who does not do any of the paperwork. I don't have any of their diagnoses. Like sometimes I can recognize dyslexia pretty generally, or like some neurodiversities are more readily apparent than others. I can often tell when I'm not talking to a neurotypical kid, but I don't necessarily know what any of their diagnoses are, except for the ways in which it is useful to me to know them so that I can help them when they're having a moment of crisis.
Yeah. I mean, I just wrote an email response to someone who reached out to the network because they're in a country where there aren't many alternative schooling options, and their kid got a like gifted and talented label from some test they took. And they were like, what should our next steps be? And one of the things I mentioned is that like I love self-directed education because it lets us focus on whatever the kids need to focus on with the like not total guarantee that they won't be bored, but the guarantee that they won't be bored because we're forcing them to be.
Right.
Like kids act out in conventional school. So like
choice boredom.
Yeah. Choice boredom, which is like I'm a fan of. I think it's productive. But
love choice boredom.
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah.
Do you want to define choice boredom? I love that term.
So choice boredom is when you have a schedule full of offerings that somebody could do every hour of the day if they wanted. Almost, I won't say complete freedom, but almost complete freedom to do whatever projects they can think up, dream up, or do. And a bunch of other people to do said projects or said offerings with, yet choose to sit somewhere and say, I'm really bored. There's nothing to do. Choice boredom.
Yeah.
Choice boredom.
I had a conversation with a 6-year-old this morning about that as self-care sometimes. Like, part of my deschooling has been giving myself permission to just, like, be and be still. And so sometimes I will, like, block out, like, an hour to stare out my window. And I will sit on the couch and stare out my window. There's, like, birds and trees, and it's lovely. But it's like, I am choosing to take this time and be bored, which, like...
Of course, this came from a, like, heteronormative, gendered thing, but, you know, that was... I always remember this term, fire gazing time. You know, it was supposed to be like, when the man comes home from work and he needs to look into the fire for an hour and drink his beer before dinner. But everybody needs their fire gazing time.
Fire signs. I want the water gazing.
Yeah, right. You can gaze at any element you want, but you gotta just gaze sometimes.
Yeah. Yeah. Being bored is powerful.
Yeah.
It forces you to decide what you actually want.
Yeah. Which could take us into talking a little bit about like navigating gendered expectations in gender diverse community. Also, Ryan, you mentioned offerings, and you both do offerings with like age and ability mixed groups. And I think it might be helpful for people to hear a little bit about what that looks and feels like.
Yeah. Well, I'll just give a quick example first. I mean, I think finding tools that can engage people of multiple ages and ability levels is important. So I'll just take history and maths because those are the two kind of recurring offerings where I use such tools, or where we use such tools. For maths, it's Khan Academy, which is pretty traditional in the way that it's laid out, and that you can do things by grade level or by subject, but it allows me, someone who's not even really strong in math, to be able to support kids, multiple kids from, between the ages of 6 and 16 who are working on very different things. And, I can't be individually helping them every minute of the class, but the tool is such that it allows them to work through until they get to a point where they're stuck, and then I can come help them. But, and then with history, using Crash Course, which we've now used for, like 6 or 7 subjects at this point.
Yeah, I really like Crash Course.
No, it's
cool
great.
videos.
Yeah, no, it's great. And I mean, they're short, they're digestible. They can lead to a deeper discussion, or they can just be what they are on the surface. They can be like, here's some information about this thing that maybe you didn't know about before. But I find that they're, short and like uncomplicated enough that like a 7-year-old can watch them and get something out of them. But it could be a room full of adults watching them also, and get to a place where you're like in really deep discussion about, some historical event. So I think the tools are important, and I think like having different expectations of participation for kids of different age levels and abilities is where you got to come at it. Like, you can't expect a 7-year-old to walk in and be able to just like participate in the same way as a 16-year-old, or I won't even use ages. You just can't expect, one kid to walk in and participate in exactly the same way and level as the next. And, that might mean even the time they can spend there focusing. One kid might for 10 minutes watch the video and then walk out, whereas, another kid might get there, talk about the video before you even start watching it, kind of give the background of what they know about the thing, and then be part of a spirited discussion after.
Right. Yeah, that point was exactly what I was going to make, right? That like sometimes sometimes kids will show up in an offering and be participating, but the way that they are participating, it doesn't look like participation at all. They're eating their lunch and rolling around on the floor and like playing with a ball that they have, and it doesn't seem like they're participating, but like I am not in that kid's brain, and I cannot tell you what they are processing in that moment. And they did it, like they are there for the offering. So that's been interesting. For some of the other ones, history in particular, I started showing up because I realized I was like looking in and realizing it was a room full of white men and boys. But part of the reason I choose to show up in that offering every week, part of my role is that I am the self-appointed person who points out who is being left out of this narrative, or the places where you could find more information about this, sidebar about gay rights. And I will leave the Stonewall book out on the table just in case you wanted to learn more. And also there were kick lines. But like to just show up in the space as a woman and as a queer person, just to be like, I am here and I am also doing history. If I am, there are days when I am the only woman in the room, and that's okay. But I think it is important to like show up on those days to be like, history is not just a subject for white men. And to recognize that, kids have privilege and bias, and that they are not intentional, but they do exist, and they affect the ways that they show up in the space. And as a facilitator, you know, to take on the role of like, I am going to point this out in a way that makes them uncomfortable. But that I just feel like that's part of what I have to do at those moments. And I'm glad to do it. I mean, it brings me great pleasure to be like, you are a tiny white man, and I'm just pointing out to you the ways that you are, you know, using your privilege wielding your privilege without knowing it. Which can be tricky, but I'm still learning to navigate that well. But it is a thing that I think about with gender in offerings, for sure. And just on a larger note on gender, supporting the best way you can support trans kids is to use their pronouns and name that they ask you to use. Just whatever it is. And, you know, we have there are not all straight cis kids in our community. And so the question of names came up. And, you know, your name is a really important thing. It is the indicator that the world calls you. I go by Mel, even though my full name is Melody, because it is a gender neutral name and I find it has more power in the world. And, you know, if your kid comes in on Wednesday and they say, my name is whatever now, then the best way that you can support them is to call them whatever, or use they pronouns, or she or he, or whatever it is that they tell you. And if they change again the next day, change them again the next day. It's really hard to be a non-binary or trans or queer kid generally, and the best way that you can support them is to call them by their right names and pronouns. That's my PSA.
You've also been good about getting more books in our library that like show representation for like genderqueer and trans kids. And we have a like one bathroom that everyone uses. I ordered us a Crime Think poster about like gender expression and expectations that's like chilling on the door.
And I love when we have potential parents come in for open houses and they're like, just have the one bathroom?
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Well, like, I had one of our littler kids today come in and like, our kids are allowed to graffiti on the bathroom stalls, and I had graffitied some, like, I'd put up some like, please flush signs, and this kid came in and he's like, your memes are bad, I'm going to fix them. Like, yeah, it's a space that we've invited them to like customize and make like theirs.
Yeah, one of the stalls says someone graffitied like a little person above the toilet paper thing that says, here is your paper, sir. And someone came along later in a different pen and wrote, or ma'am. And a kid recently asked me if it was me that did that. And I was like, no, I have no idea who it is. And it is a mysterious person who added that little reminder that like there are different forms of formal address, and whatever yours is, like, here is your toilet paper.
Yeah. I mean, one of the nice things about being in New York City is going out and about, like taking kids to shows. We're just walking around the city and looking at the art, watching people, noticing what's in advertisements. Like, we get opportunities to talk about a lot of this stuff. And, you know, for me, a lot of the like personal work has been like constantly educating myself and striving to like be educating myself.
Yes.
But then just like being in humble and authentic conversation with the kids, modeling that for them, opening space for them to explore different, you know, aspects of the world, leads to really interesting moments, like teenagers coming up and being like, so if I walk around without a shirt on in the summer, like, is that oppressing you? Can we talk about that? And I'm like, yeah, teenager, let's talk. Like, cool. The stuff that you like talk about with them, or like Mel, you and I have been talking in front of them about trying to make sure we're reading more works by women of color.
Yes.
And, like, you know, they don't always engage in those conversations, but they know, one, that they can come to us for those things, and two, this is something we're like prioritizing and like that there are action steps we're taking.
Yeah.
Which means they can do the same. And we do that like on a whole variety of topics in our space. Yeah. And I see the kids like hearing it.
Yeah. And again, it's the like not expecting them to do anything with that hearing or react in any way, but just to know that it's like we're having the conversation and that we are here if they want to talk about, if they want to join us.
Yeah, but somebody will attempt to neutralize the gender in our bathroom graffiti and like, cool.
Yes.
We are, I don't know if we've hit an hour, if we're nearing the end. There isn't a timer on this, and I have my watch, but I don't know when we started.
I think we started at 39, Abby.
I believe that we are nearing an hour, yes, or over 10 minutes. Just love talking to you lovely humans.
I think we haven't talked about like socioeconomic diversity, which I think shows up more in our space than it will in some other people's because we're sliding scale in New York City in East Harlem.
Yeah.
And the other only thing I can think of is the blip of like when we have kids who don't speak English, like, and trying to accommodate them and whether it's possible to.
Yeah. Well, I think we should certainly talk about non-English speakers before we get off, just because we have had quite a few and it's been such a cool experience. Should we talk about our visiting students? Or international ones, at least?
Yeah,
Sure. I mean, it's been a like really great reminder that you can learn a language by non-traditional means. Like you don't have to take a language class to learn it. You can be immersed in it. You can not speak it at all. Start, maybe watching some cartoons, just listening in on people's conversations. And then a few months later, you can magically, like actually pick it up and absorb it. And I mean, I think it's definitely, science has proven that it's definitely easier for younger kids to do this, but I think it's possible for anyone really. And I don't know, it's been really cool to see like a young kid coming in speaking no English and people being like, well, how's that going to work? Like, how are we going to communicate with her? And like watching them figure that out and then watching this kid like pick up English and then just feel comfortable with it by the time that her time at the school was up.
Yep. Yeah, kids' brains before they hit puberty are still plastic and they can pick up languages, like the language instinct is in them and being immersed in it is enough, which is crazy. It doesn't seem like that should be true, but we had a kid 6 years old visiting who showed up speaking not a word of English and by the end of 3 months was like perfectly able to communicate and make herself understood in a way that really astounded a lot of our other kids and inspired one of them to start learning German, who is still doing it even though she has been gone for a long time. We have a Japanese class, we have a Spanish offering, we have a visiting student from Colombia right now. Someone told me today that they wanted to learn Korean.
Wow.
Which doesn't surprise me because we have a lot of K-pop fans. And yeah, just having a person in the space who showed that you can learn to speak another language, that like language is like flexible and fluid. Oh, we also have Russian and we have Hebrew spoken in the space. We have a couple of Spanish speakers now that I'm thinking about it. Am I missing? I feel like I'm Slovenia. Yeah. I'm missing several.
English, Hungarian, Mandarin. We have New York City.
Yeah, that's true. But just generally, I think for the kids, even the ones who speak only English, to see that language is something that they can learn and pick up like pretty easily if they just work at it. has been really empowering, and I'm glad it's a thing that we are excited about.
Yeah. I mean, something that's been interesting. So, like, we have somewhat changed the expectations for kids who don't speak English yet. Like, their Kanbans look different.
Mm-hmm.
In meetings looks different. And we haven't yet had a kid who only speaks a language that no one else in the community speaks.
That's
Usually
true.
there's been at least one person
Yeah, good point.
who they can communicate with. So I'm
Be
curious.
it a facilitator or another kid.
Yeah. Um, yeah, I'm curious about like what the experience of being in an ALC would look like for someone who was like totally linguistically isolated. Although I ran a summer camp once where we had a little girl who only spoke Russian and no one else like spoke Russian, but like she did fine because
Actually, this reminds me. At Cottonwood last year, there was a little girl named Fury who was from Iceland, and she didn't speak any English, and no one spoke her language. And
Mm-hmm.
actually, now she was even younger. I think she was maybe 3 or 4, and it was kind of the same thing that we were talking about before. I mean, you know, it took a little longer certainly because there was no one who spoke her native language, but she still picked up English very quickly. And
Yeah.
in a program, self-directed education program with younger kids, there's less, I guess, pressure as far as like the intention setting and like some of the more complicated tools. So I think it's a little bit easier there, but like it's definitely possible.
Yeah, it's an interesting situation where the younger the kid is, the less worried I am about them.
Right.
cool. Thank you for being on an hour plus on call after a full school day. Do you want to take another 3 minutes and touch on like socioeconomic diversity in our community, or should we wrap and leave that for another call? I have a teenager meeting, so
I think that would be, I think that is a topic that merits its own entire phone call, because there's the like this part about it, which is like how do you support people who show up from different socioeconomic backgrounds, but also there's the logistics part of it, which like y'all deal with on the administrative side, which is like how do you support a sliding scale, how do you like have the dollars to finance that. Like I know we do it one way, but I would be interested to hear if other schools do it a different way. Like I know Mosaic has a really cool different system than we do for supporting the sliding scale, so I vote
definitely more than a 3
whole topic.
Definitely more than a 3-minute conversation.
Yeah.
All right.
So somebody proposed that one in startup support, and we'll get right on it.
Yeah, I can put it. I have to check December's calendar. I don't know what the weeks look like, but maybe that could be our December topic. I'll throw it in Slack and get feedback.
Sounds good.
Cool. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you, Abby.
Thanks, Abby.
All right. Meeting
Meeting adjourned.